Everyone.
I do.
So why don't
Great.
you ask who does want?
Yeah, who doesn't want the study? He has it. There are two people. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm very pleased with the way the first panel went, because this is precisely the idea we had in mind. We wanted to start a conversation. We wanted to start a discussion. Actually, I am going to transcribe. We are going to transcribe some of the questions that were asked in the first panel, and I'm shoot it to some people in Brazil. So, especially Chris Hill's questions too. I'm going to send it to Glauco and to other people, because I think it's very important. I also want to ask the people, the millions around the world that are watching this webcast, if they can send us some feedback, would be nice. You'll find the way to do it on our website, www.wilsoncenter.org. And I failed to mention one person that is actually going to be the representative of pharma at our advisory council, who is my dear old friend Andrew Rudman, who I met many years ago when I was working here as a correspondent. He was working for the U.S. government. So welcome, Andrew. Thank you very much for becoming a part of the advisory council. Our advisory council has companies such as Embraer, such as Veirano Advogados, such as Goldman Sachs, Alcoa, Anthony Harrington, the former U.S. ambassador to Brazil, and Alan Belda, the current chairman of Alcoa, are the co-presidents, and we have other friends that are also more academic advisors of the council. We hope to have our first full meeting in October, when we are going to have a second annual dinner of the Brazil Institute in São Paulo, and we will honor two Brazilians with the Woodrow Wilson Award for corporate citizenship. Is Mr. Jorge Gerdau from the steel industry, one big innovator in Brazil, and another person that is really an innovator in the social area, Dr. Zilda Arns Newman, president and director of Pastoral da Criança. They take care of more than 2 million children in Brazil. It started in the Catholic Church, is now an ecumenical movement in Brazil, using more than 300,000 volunteers to take very basic care of children. And it's something now that Dr. Zilda is doing in 16 other countries around the world. And they will both, Gerdau and Zilda Arns, will be honored by the Wilson Center in São Paulo, October the 23rd. Now, we will continue now for a second panel of discussions with three speakers. They are Ricardo Mendes, who is the executive director of Prospectiva Consulting. Ricardo has a master's degree in international relations from Cambridge University, and he has studied international relations at my university, the Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo, where I was a freshman in the glorious year of 1968. And where one of the leaders was no other than José Dirceu de Oliveira. Ricardo specializes in international trade and investment policies, and he is the principal executive at Prospectiva, where he coordinates various projects focusing on political risk, intellectual property, international trade for large IT, pharmaceutical, and financial services and agribusiness firms. William Marandola is the executive manager of a consortium of pharmaceutical companies in Brazil. He has joined that going far in 2003 and led the initiative that established that institution going far as an research and development biopharmaceutical company in 2005. He was also the founder and executive director of the Agency for Pharmaceutical Innovation Management, an industry university liaison program at the Uniemp Foundation in São Paulo. He has a master's in science and technology and innovation from Sussex University in England. Flavio Greenspan is a consultant, a director of a very interesting institution based in São Paulo called the Association of Brazilian Innovative Enterprises, AMPEI. He's a director also of the Department of Technology and Association of Industry for the Association of Industries of the State of São Paulo. Previously, he served as president of Motorola in Brazil. He was a full professor at the University of Rio de Janeiro and has a PhD in biomedical engineering from the University of Pennsylvania. So I think we'll start with Ricardo, who will offer us a little bit of the bigger picture. And the idea in this panel is to focus a little bit more on sectors. We had one more speaker that unfortunately couldn't make it, so we'll catch him in the next phase of this conversation, Felipe Teixeira from Embrapa. But we will start then with Ricardo.
Well, I think I figured out how this works. So, first of all, I would like to thank Paulo for this invitation and his colleagues at the Wilson Center. It's really a pleasure to be here today. I think my presentation will be a link between the first panel and the second panel. Okay. Well, after my presentation, we will hear some case studies about innovation in specific sectors. So what I'll try to do is to give a broader overview of the mechanisms that Brazil is pursuing to promote innovation, and some of the bottlenecks for this as well. So I'm going to be a little bit more critical than the first panelists here. I will show some of the main problems that Brazil is facing in this goal to promote innovation. Okay, this presentation here is based on several projects that we're working for different clients in industries like the pharmaceutical area, the information technology, and other areas as well. So I think I'll be able to give an overview of these policies. Well, the presentation is structured like this. We'll first have a look at the innovation policies, especially the industrial policy and technological mechanism that Brazil is promoting, and also have a quick overview of the other measures and institutions that were created for this particular purpose of promoting innovation. We'll have a look at the bottlenecks at macro-institutional aspects, and also have a look at the Brazilian international strategies to promote innovation. Okay, one of the main goals of the current industrial and technological policies of the Brazilian government is precisely to promote international insertion. So we'll see how these strategies are aligned with Brazil's trade policy and other strategies to promote this innovation overseas. And then we'll highlight some of the conclusions here. Well, this first slide gives a roadmap, basically, of the advantages, disadvantages, and challenges that Brazil faces when we talk about innovation. Some of the advantages. Brazil has a very large local scientific base. It was mentioned here earlier that most of the Brazilian scientists are based, I can't remember if, but most of the Brazilian scientists are based at universities and research centers. So one of the challenges that Brazil has is to link these scientists that are now based at universities to industrial, to industries and to private companies. This is a main challenge. Another advantage Brazil has a large installed industrial capacity. Now, if you compare Brazil to other BRIC countries, you will see that the BRIC countries have a large potential for everything, but Brazil already has a large installed industrial capacity, and it's a matter of turning this installed capacity into more innovation and into more business. Market dimension as well. The size of the Brazilian market is really favorable for promotion of innovation. The purchasing power of the state, we'll talk a little bit about this later. Telecom infrastructure, if you compare the telecom infrastructure of Brazil with other BRIC countries, it's really, we have a much better infrastructure there. Multinational companies, out of the top 500 companies, 470 companies are already based in Brazil and doing different kinds of business there. So we already have not only a large installed industrial capacity, but also multinational companies already play an important role in the Brazilian economy. And this has been going on since the 1960s. It started with the import substitution model, actually, when companies, in order to access the Brazilian local market, instead of exporting, they access the market through direct investments there. Biodiversity, there's no need to talk about that. And recently, the innovation law, the innovation framework that Brazil is trying to create, it's also, this was really an important mark for promotion of innovation there. Disadvantages, low quality basic education. Okay, this is still a major problem for this. Some sectors are particularly affected by this when they're trying to promote more business and innovative business as well. Well, as I said earlier, the distance between scientists' interests and market demands is still a big gap. Other panelists, I guess, can talk a little bit more about this, but there is still a large distance between academia and applied research in Brazil. And also limited capacity for commercializing innovation. Innovations are there, basic science is being done, but it's a matter of transforming this into products, how to commercialize this innovation. This is still a challenge for Brazil. Macro-institutional aspects. I think this will be the focus of. I'll try to be quick, but we'll talk a little bit more about this. And also international strategies. I think this is another point that we see as a disadvantage for Brazil to promote innovation, as it's willing to do in its strategies set up in the industrial and innovative policies. So what are the challenges in this context? Building a local innovative capacity, more private investments in R&D, strengthening networks between public and private institutions, macro-institutional aspects that eliminate barriers for innovation. We'll talk about this also. And international strategies aligned with innovation priorities. We see somehow that, I think it was mentioned here earlier, that in a way Brazil doesn't seem to promote internationally what the goals, what the targets are for promoting innovation and for exporting innovation especially. Okay. So what is this industrial, technological and foreign trade policy? It's also known by this acronym of PITSE. In Portuguese, it stands for Industrial, Technological and Foreign Trade Policy. It has been implemented since 2004 by Lula's government. Right after Lula took power, he implemented these policies, which consists of a set of articulated measures and institutions which aim to strengthen and improve Brazil's industrial base. And the new thing in these industrial policies, as compared to former industrial policies that Brazil has promoted in the past, is the improvement, the focus in the improvement of innovative capacity of companies. This is really something new. And also another new aspect of this industrial policy is the focus in promoting international insertion. In the past, industrial policies were directly linked to import substitution. It was not an intention to create a competitive environment, competitive companies to compete at equal level internationally. What makes this the PITSE, what makes the new industrial policy different from the others is particularly these aspects. So focus on innovation, industrial production, and foreign trade. It has three different focuses. And it also breaks this distinction between sectoral and horizontal policies. I think it was also mentioned here that industrial policies now are mainly there's a set of measures taken that affect horizontally all companies from different sectors. But in this particular case, priorities were also given to special sectors. Okay, some of the sectors that were also mentioned earlier in the panel that are more protected in Brazil are part of the strategies here for promoting industrial policies. Also, something new in this industrial policy, it also includes services sector. Services has never been considered a strategic sector for Brazil. Brazil has a tradition that development will come from industry. Okay, and in this particular innovation policies here, there is a focus. The information technology sector is one of the priority sectors. It creates a set of rules for articulation between promotion institutions. We'll talk about these promotion mechanisms, and private companies, and priority given to sectors and potential sectors. We'll talk about this. And there is no distinction between state-owned companies, which still play an important role in Brazil, especially in this context of industrial policy. Not only the purchasing power of these companies, but also the technology that can be incorporated by some of these companies. Petrobras is one of the most innovative company in Brazil, and it's a state-owned company. There's also no distinction between domestic and multinational companies. All these mechanisms that are being created are accessible for both Brazilian companies and multinational companies operating in Brazil. Once a company is established presence in the Brazilian market, they receive national treatment. So everything that is available for domestic companies is also available for international ones. But as you'll see, sometimes these mechanisms are not very interesting for these companies because of a series of different aspects. So what's the focus of this PITSI, of this innovation policy we have? Innovation and technology development, international insertion, industrial modernization, and institutional climate, increase of productivity, productive capacity of the companies. The priority sectors are the ones that were mentioned here earlier, the IT software sector, capital goods sector, and also semiconductors. Brazil is really lagging behind this area. The other sectors is we can see some good results, but semiconductors as being really the worst sectors of all. And the pharmaceutical chain. Here it's included chemicals that are used as inputs for medicines. It's also included the R&D, research and development, and the medications themselves. And it also considers some potential areas like the biotechnology sector, because of the potential Brazil has in this area, nanotechnology, and biomass, renewable energies. Okay, so these are the focus. And a specific agency was created to coordinate these industrial policies, which is the Brazilian Agency for Industrial Development. Okay, ABDI. Well, besides, or in the same, along the same lines, in alignment with this PITSI, Brazil has been promoting and has created a series of other measures and institutions. The innovation law that I mentioned earlier was approved in 2004 with the aim of promoting applied innovation. This was really an important mark for companies. It has its problems. I'm not going to talk about the innovation law here. We could talk about all the problems it has, but as an institutional signal that now Brazil is really willing to promote innovation, this was considered very positive from companies and from a scientific community that are trying to be more entrepreneurial in these areas. The Brazilian Development Bank has also created several credit lines focused specifically on innovation activities in the pharmaceutical industry, in the IT industry, and other areas as well. We have the sectorial funds from FINEP also with the purpose of innovation. Apex, the Brazilian Exports Promotion Agency, is doing some work on export promotion. Then we have SEBRAE, which focuses on small and medium-sized companies. Government procurements, as I mentioned earlier, has a very important role there of especially promoting purchases of domestic companies, of innovative products that come out of domestic companies. State-owned companies like Petrobras, Eletrobras, and Bank of Brazil, they have an important role promoting the whole productive chain of these sectors. Scientific research is promoted by agencies like CNPq, linked to the Ministry of Science and Technology, FAPESP, which is the state of Sao Paulo, a promotion agency, and they have been creating special credit lines and special funds for innovation activities and in applied innovation activities. This is something also new for these agencies, which used to have a focus on basic science only. Okay, and also centers like Embrapa. We're supposed to have someone from Embrapa here. I think unfortunately he had a problem with his passport, but it would be very interesting to hear what kind of activities they are developing in this area to promote innovation and applied research. This is a broad overview of the agencies in the federal government that are responsible for innovation policies. Okay, there are several agencies. Ministry of Development, Industry and Trade, and the agencies that are linked to it, including the Brazilian Patent Office, the Ministry of Science and Technology, the Ministry of Health in the pharmaceutical sector plays an important role in this area as well. Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Education, and state-owned companies like Petrobras also. As I mentioned earlier, a specific agency was created to coordinate the activities between all these ministries. Okay, but what we see is that ABDI has still played, its role has been very limited. Okay, it still hasn't been, it's very new. We're criticizing something that still really hasn't had the time to become known, to become, to actually do the work it was created to do. But if we analyze since 2004 when it was created, there is still really the role ABDI has played has been very limited. Okay, and what we see, and this we are saying that is one of the macro-institutional problems for the promotion of innovation in Brazil, in spite of all these mechanisms that have been created for this, is a lack of coordinated action and definition of clear and factable goals for this. So we're talking about innovation. There's not even a clear definition of what innovation is. Different strategies from different ministries in terms of innovation and what role innovation is going to play in the Brazilian economy. Okay, and for that, it's a very difficult job. Sometimes one agency has one view and the other has a completely different one, and they end up not taking any measures. This happens quite often, and the role of ABDI should be strengthened in this sense to coordinate better all these agencies that are involved in it. Also, innovation policies, all these mechanisms that are being created are often hindered by domestic business climate and institutions. I'll just list here some examples. There are several others that companies that are operating, that are trying to innovate in Brazil face, but this is, we try to organize the main arguments they say. So first, we can classify them as contradictory policies. For instance, prior consent, procedures for bioresearch. So it's really a problem. If you talk to Natura or companies in the biotechnology companies that are trying to do research in Brazil, they often face very, very difficult procedures to obtain a license to do research. So if it's on the top of the agenda in Brazil to promote innovation, how can an agency make it so difficult for companies to actually do research? This is a question we ask, and they do face a lot of, it's very hard for them. A backlog for patent applications. A good job has been done here, I think, Avila. Sorry?
It's not a policy.
Yeah, we're talking... These are, we're talking about the climate that actually hindered the policy. So the policies are there, and yeah. A good job is being done here. Everyone that deals with the Brazil's patent office has to admit this, but there's still a lot of work to be done here. The distance between academic research and industry. I've already talked about this. I'm not going to mention this anymore. Another category of problems here faced by innovative companies and scientists that are innovating in Brazil is an inefficient allocation of resources. So tax burden, serious problem in Brazil. If you compare Brazil to other BRICS, this is where we're going to face serious barriers for promoting innovation. The innovation law tries to solve some of this problem, but it's not perfect because it gives tax deduction for companies that are investing in innovation, but new companies, startups, don't have taxes. They don't have profit taxes. They don't pay income taxes. So for them, this is not an incentive that they're receiving. Insufficient and uncoordinated funds for innovation. There is a lot of funds from BNDES, from FINEP, but the criteria for obtaining them is very hard. Okay, these agencies still have a hard time to evaluate if, how much it's worth, how much innovation products are worth. The Brazilian Development Bank has a lot of experience in lending money for industrial projects, and they know how to evaluate that and how to calculate what the return on those investments will be, but not for innovation. For innovation, they're still trying to figure out how to evaluate these projects, how much they're worth, and what are the risks involved. And often, what companies say about these funds is that interest rates are very high, because when you're innovating, you're putting money into an activity that you're not sure if it's going to work or not. The risks are very high. Okay, so this can also be a problem. Infant venture capital market. This is often also, there is a lot of funds for basic research, but not for intermediate applied innovation activities. And this is where a venture capital market would come up, and this is still very, very mature in Brazil. This is still to be promoted in Brazil. Qualified labor programs not focused on innovation. This is a serious problem there as well. A lot of PhDs are coming out of the universities, but are not being prepared exactly for the innovation priorities that were given by the Brazilian government. So this goes back to my previous slide that says that the agencies are taking policies that are not really coordinated. Okay? The priorities are not exactly being given to the sectors that are considered priorities by the innovation industrial and innovation policies. Labor costs for research-intensive activities. Labor costs in Brazil are very, very high, and Brazil has very rigid labor laws, legislation that makes it very difficult for innovation activities. And the last category would be the regulatory framework, which is not consolidated. Okay, so we still, this is I think William will be able to talk about this, a lack of standards and transparency in the agencies. You never know when you apply for a license at some of the agencies in Brazil, you don't know what the response is going to be. One time it can be one response, the other time can be a different one. You don't know what the criteria for that is. Very often the criteria are not transparent, and you don't know what the outcome of that is. You don't know how long it's going to take. It can take 6 months for a license application. It can take 3 years. This lack of standards and transparency is a serious problem for that. And unstable legislation. Some of the agencies come up with new decrees every day. They have more decrees than days a year, if you count. And it's very difficult to keep track of all of this. Okay? If you're operating on the legal side of an innovative company, you have to keep track of this. This costs money, and it's very difficult. Sometimes you can be doing something that is not considered legal, and you're not even aware of that. Okay, that includes the innovation law. People are very afraid of using the innovation law, which gives tax deduction in several activities. They're not sure what the inland revenue is going to say if they actually start using that. They are afraid that somebody from the tax department will come and say that they're not paying the taxes right. It's not very clear. This regulatory framework in Brazil is still very problematic. Well, just an overview of these macro-institutional problems. Now I'll try criticizing a little bit Brazil's international strategies for promoting innovation. We can say that Brazil's international strategies don't seem to be aligned with innovation priorities. If you look at Brazil's trade policy agendas, they're focused on market access for agriculture. This seems to be a top priority on the Brazilian agenda. And we're not talking about a promotion of technology, which is included in the agribusiness sector. We're talking about market access. We're talking about tax deduction, subsidies, elimination, and other issues. These are very important issues. I'm not saying they're not, but they seem to be the prime focus on Brazil's foreign policy, while we have many other things with more value added that could be also incorporated into Brazil's trade policies. Such as technology transfer, harmonization of standards is very hard. We have a South American integration agenda. If you try exporting products from Brazil to neighboring countries, sometimes it's very difficult. They're very much focused on eliminating tariffs. Tariffs are not even the major problems these days. Harmonization of standards can be a much more efficient tool than just claiming for tariff eliminations. Trading services is a known agenda in Brazil as well. As we said, one of the priorities in the industrial and innovation policies in Brazil is the IT sector, and this is very little incorporated into Brazil's trade policy strategies. You never hear Brazil being aggressive in these areas, unlike India and like other developing countries. Intellectual property, protection of property in general, we're talking, Brazil has just had problems with Petrobras investments in Bolivia, and these investments were not protected by an investment agreement there. So how can that be? South America is a priority on Brazil's foreign policies, and even with that country, we don't have an investment agreement. So this is also something that could be incorporated. Another point we see is no specific policies to increment investments by multinational companies present in the market. Brazil has most of the major multinational companies in different sectors, some of them very intensive in technology, already operating in the Brazilian market for years and years. They know how that works, okay? And they would be prepared to make more investments to add value to their production in Brazil. But unfortunately, this is not part of a policy strategy in Brazil. It's like the rest of the world is really trying to attract investments to these countries, and most of these investments are already in Brazil, and there is not a clear policy for improving the quality of these activities. The position Brazil defends on intellectual property regimes overseas as well. This can be really whatever the image like that Brazil sells overseas is not of a country that is trying to promote innovation. Okay, some of these policies really can affect the perception that foreign companies have of the business climate in Brazil, and also the inexistence of an investment attraction agenda. This is agency. Sorry, a lot of investments going into Brazil, but it's not selected investments. Okay, there's no specific policies. There's not an agency that is promoting investments for innovation, which is really what the BRICS are competing between themselves to attract. Okay, and one interesting point here is that scientists and innovative companies do not participate in the policy making of Brazil's international strategy. Sometimes we have the impression that these strategies are taken by people that are not really fully aware of the demands of these companies, of the scientists, and of these new strategies of Brazil. This is just to give an overview of the possibility. We're talking about intellectual property, which is one of the main controversial issues in the Brazilian international agenda, and which is very important for attracting and for promoting innovation in the country. We did a study a little while ago comparing the U.S. bilateral agreements in intellectual property with the Brazilian legislation, what we have in force now in Brazil. There are some differences, but not in terms of legislation. It's more in terms of enforcement and procedures. Okay, if you look at the legislation itself, there will be very little differences. Brazil could be a little bit more aggressive in terms of getting closer to the United States and to other developing countries in terms of intellectual property agendas. Okay, unfortunately, it doesn't. And also, this is the last slide, in terms of trade and services, this is an interesting one because it shows how other countries are really aligning their trade policy strategies to their innovation policy strategies. We look at Brazil's commitments here during the Uruguay round when the GATS was created. The column in green are the commitments that Brazil has actually bound there, and on the second column there we see Brazil's Doha round offer. This was the last offer that Brazil tabled during the Doha round, and then we have a look at this is for information technology services, which is priority in the innovation sector, in innovation policies here. If we look at the same commitments that India has made, look at the first column. India used to be an ally of Brazil during the Uruguay round in services, and then India has completely shifted its position to be more aggressive in this area, and it's signalizing to the world that it's actually willing to be more open and to promote their IT industry overseas. Okay, so these are two basic examples that we can say. and both in terms of macro-institutional aspects and in terms of international strategies. I think Brazil still has to do a lot to make the mechanisms that is being created effective. Okay, thank you.
William, the floor is yours.
Just a second here to put. Okay, first I would like to thank Dr. Paulo Sotero and the Wilson Center for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here and to talk about something that unfortunately I don't picture it as nicely as it was put before. I would like to make some criticism. And I would like to say, just to start, that doing R&D in Brazil, we actually gained two things, our group of companies. And actually, we gained one thing and lost another one. We gained a lot of weight, and we have been losing lots of hair these days. This means that doing R&D in Brazil is very difficult. And what I'm going to try to show is a little bit of evolution of our thoughts over the last 4 years. And maybe we have departed from the wrong starting point back in 2003. And I would like to show a little bit of that. I have quite a few slides, but my intention is to put a little bit of the context for you to understand what we are talking about, and to see if towards the end we can connect more of the policy issues with the innovation issues. Well, just a little bit about COINFAR. COINFAR, aside of being a very ugly acronym, it started from a consortium of pharmaceutical industrial companies, but it was established as a company in 2005, and we are supposed to do basically R&D in toxins and venoms out of the Brazilian biodiversity. We are the radical innovation venture of these three Brazilian national companies, which are called Biolab, União Química, and Axê. And we pretty much follow the model overseas. I mean, we are a virtual biotech company, and we have lots of coordination in-house, and we are supposed to outsource everything, from testing to production and everything else. We are biopharmaceutical. We basically work with therapeutics, and our core areas are cancer, pain, and wound healing. Well, just to give you the context, what kind of innovation are we talking about? We are talking about radical innovation. For instance, this analgesic peptide that we derived from one of the native Brazilian snakes, it has shown a very nice profile for acute and neuropathic pain. And our research together with Brazilian universities show that it's much more potent than morphine, for instance, and doesn't hold the same side effects. And also, it's a long-lasting effect that can hold up to 48 hours. And this has a major impact into some therapeutic areas. We are doing studies abroad now to confirm some of the concepts of this drug. Another project that we are holding, it's a cancer therapeutics that we derived from the tick. And don't ask me how they took the saliva from the tick. It's a long process, but we derived this protein. It's a recombinant protein that has a very nice profile in reducing the size of tumors and reducing metastases, and it has shown very low toxicity in normal cells. So, I mean, these are the type of innovations that we're talking about. It's radical innovations, new molecules, and that it started from the beginning, isolating these compounds from natural resources. Well, just to give a little bit of context, when we talk about biopharmaceuticals, the rule is about partnering. Nobody does anything alone. So, as you can see, it doesn't matter the size of the company, the stage you are in development. The rule is about partnering. And this is just a graph showing that lots of companies, they are For the major blockbusters, they are taking these projects out of collaboration projects with small companies, with medium companies, and so forth. And this just to show that, for instance, how much of the launches come from internal R&D and how much come from in-licensed products. And it shows that there's a shift for the bigger, the juicy products. Most it's coming from in-licensed R&D. And as I said, it doesn't matter. Usually the phase, the idea is to partner as early as possible to reduce risk and to share costs. And the model for biopharmaceuticals, I think I have some friends here from the sector that everybody knows. I mean, the stuff has to work in humans, which means phase 2 clinical trials. Once it has proven concept in humans, we everybody, if there is a good profile, everybody is going to search you. Okay, and as I said, it doesn't matter the size of the company, but everybody wants to partner with the Pfizers around the world, the Mercks around the world, and so forth. But there's still a lot of projects unpartnered, which opens possibilities for medium-sized companies and also other small-sized companies to have collaborations among themselves. This is just, the value chain. I think most of you here are more knowledgeable in this area, but pretty much what we would like to show here, that biopharmaceutical R&D is a science-based industry. I mean, it's extremely scientific, not only because of regulation, but also because the scientific advances in medical areas and the genomics, proteomics stuff has brought a lot of innovation to the sides. And as everybody knows, it's a funnel. I mean, it starts with lots of molecules, very little comes to become a profitable drug in the market. And it's extremely regulated, lots of money we have to put in, and very risky. I mean, in the end, you can, for instance, have some kind of failure with your drug, with a very minor issue in phase 3 clinical trials. That means that you lost the whole investment all before. And this is a very nice graph that I like. It shows how many companies, after the biotechnology surge during the 90s, how many companies and actors are participating during the discovery and development phase. So, I mean, it's a huge value chain, lots of service providers, lots of companies doing internal R&D and so forth. Well, and because there is a lot of people talk about productivity in the pharmaceutical R&D and the biopharmaceutical in general, actually, and lots of companies are looking for new products, and there is an outsourcing wave going on that was a little bit stronger during the last 2 years, but still we still see this outsourcing coming on. And lots of people says that it comes from complexity of drug discovery process, out of regulation, and out of also that most of companies are not trying to keep in-house, all the infrastructure and necessary human resources to do all of this. They want to partner, they want to go after the more specialized people and providers for these services. And it shows here, this is a cyclical environment. Once stuff, for instance here, this is just growth and value over the years for different stages of biopharmaceutical development. And these figures are just for outsourced businesses, And you see that that means service sector, basically. For instance, in 2006, just in preclinical, we are talking about $4 billion spent just in outsourcing activities. That basically means studies in animals. In vitro, in vivo studies, and production of small and large molecules and so forth. That's a whole lot of money. And you can see that the pattern goes for clinical phase 1, clinical phase 2, lab services, analytical services, and so forth. And what I'd like to show here that this is cyclical. Since everybody is looking for new molecules, there's a lot of investment into the discovery and to the preclinical stages. And then once these molecules have go and show efficacy and safety, they pass to the next stage. So, I mean, probably in a couple of years or so, maybe the investments in the preclinical and discovery stage might drop a little bit, and you're going to see the investments in the clinical the different clinical phases coming up a little bit. Well, and this is just to show that we are now like expecting lots of new molecules along the way, but as everybody knows, this is a very risky business. We don't know how much of these molecules will actually reach the market. But just to show that the growth rate for the preclinical stage is much higher than for the clinical stage. Well, and who is surfing this wave? Of course, India and China. Basically because they market very well, that they have the resources, they are putting up the infrastructure, and they show, okay, here, our PhD and master students is at least half of the price or less. For instance, as in the US, a PhD scientist costs around $300,000 a year. In India, it's around $60,000 a year. And probably the scientist was formed into a major US or European university. So they know how to market that. But once we talk to our partners around the world, we have seen that still quality is a very big issue. So not all of them are going to India and China, and some of the companies that are here might confirm that, just because of cost reduction factor, but also because of access to market and other issues too. But they know how to market that very well. But Brazil, as everybody knows, has some training in the scientific fields, and we also have this kind of cost parameters. I mean, that we could maybe not compete exactly in the same parameters within India and China, but our researchers, the cost of doing R&D in Brazil should be much lower than doing the US or Europe. But the thing is, lots of the scientists in India and China, they are shifting from the scientific work to more of a development work. And in Brazil, we kept our scientists into universities just doing scientific work. And this is just one of the reports that's talking about the dynamics. I mean, that was the cyclic that we were experiencing. There is a productivity factor that influences all of that. Globalization issues, I mean, everybody knows what's going on. But what the countries like India and China, they are taking advantage of this situation and put policy to help their national market. That's something different. In India and China, they always look abroad in terms to make their business feasible, in terms of getting this international demand, this outsourcing wave. In Brazil, no, we never look abroad to see if we can take advantage of the international demand. And usually it goes like this. It's a learning curve, right? For instance, this shows in India where they started with very strong capacity in manufacturing, data management because of the IT industry, and they're moving back in the value chain to see if they can start have more competencies in chemistry and other chemistry fields for discovering new molecules, and also in clinical trials. So they started with something. They were very good in manufacturing of generics, for example. So they are moving back into the value chain and try to show that they can build up very fast competencies in the other parts of the value chain. And they market very well. They market a lot. They call every company, hey, come do R&D with us. We are pouring money there, and they don't care too much if the money is going to return in terms of commercialization or anything. But they're building lots of new universities and R&D centers. And they tell to the companies, come here that we have the bases. And as you see, they have lots of events around just in this area. Well, what's the regulatory environment involved? And there is this paper that I like a lot, and actually I remember during my master years that very good professor, which was my supervisor, Professor Keith Pavitt. He has a very good seminal paper of 1984, I think, that the title was The Sectoral Dynamics of Innovation. So I have sometimes problems in events like this when we talk too broad, too general about policy, and we don't see the dynamics of innovation, the industrial dynamics of one sector. And we see that most of the actions does not actually help us in specific sectors. And the Europeans started looking at that to see why are we falling behind in the US compared to the US in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology sector. And they were thinking about market failures, and they saw it was not. I mean, this is a very nice conclusion from a paper from Professor Lasseter and Orsenigo in 2001, where they says that where they say that when you think about regulation just to correct market failures, maybe it's not the best strategy. You have to have compensation actions and measures, and you have to understand that market, that dynamic, as a system failure. For instance, there's a lot of regulation on price controls of drugs, but I mean they have to compensate that with incentives to innovate, and I'll show a little bit of that later. And this is also with the European market showing that regulation is very important all over the value chain, as from the discovery side until the distribution and the marketing of the drugs. And it shows that it encompasses intellectual property, lots of technical regulatory requirements about safety and efficacy of drugs, and the healthcare system plays an important role, and efficient market. So it shows the return of investments to the innovators. And I like it. It's another very good paper from another professor from SPRU that's called Professor Basil Aquiladelis that says, okay, policy should be around these driving forces of innovation. Should be around raw materials, science and technology base, legislation in general, societal needs, market demand, and competition. But of course, the company plays an important role to organizing itself for innovation. So the company culture plays an important role too. And he shows in this paper how a company organizes itself. And it's nice because he comes with an analysis of about 1,200 drugs. And he analyzes how the organizational setting and the political regimes, the policy affected these drugs along the years. Well, just to give you a little bit of understanding of the Brazilian market, it's a $10 billion market dollars. So I mean we are close there to ethanol, as I heard one figure here, and as put earlier, it is part of the industrial policy of 2004 that put pharmaceuticals, IT, capital equipment as the major areas for the industrial policy. So it's a 10 billion market that grew in our local currency at about 11% last year. The major player, top 10 companies, we see here that the multinationals, of course, they dominate the market, but we see 1, 2, 3, 4 companies among the top 10 Brazilian companies, but very strong commercial position. If you look at their R&D, they have very low investments in R&D. Actually, one of the companies here is one of our shareholders, and Coinfar I think they have less than 1% of investments in R&D. Coinfar and other internal programs that they have, it's less than 1%. But these top 10 companies, they sum up to almost half of the market, 4.4 billion and a half more or less. And one of the major complaints of the Brazilian sector is, of course, price controls. And we see that the sector has suffered a lot has had allowance to readjust prices lower than the inflation rates. And as you can imagine, most of the raw materials that come to Brazil, they are imports. So sometimes currency can be an issue for us. Nowadays, since currency, the Brazilian real is a little bit stronger, nowadays the raw materials is weaker. The raw materials are coming less expensive. But why I'm talking about price controls? This is the same paper that I mentioned about Professor Basil Aquiladelis. He says that productivity in R&D is, and he has econometric measures to show that. That's a very nice paper. That it's linked to cash flows and how much you have invested in R&D the year before. And we know that if we hold the margins of the pharmaceutical companies and you don't have any incentives for innovation, they will reduce their investments in R&D. So this is just to show that it gotta compensate somehow. Okay, we know that we need price controls, but we also know that we need some types of incentives to innovation. Well, snapshot of the Brazilian situation. This is a graph that I created a couple of years ago, and unfortunately hasn't changed much. If we were in ideal situation, basically, if we start a discovery to see what's the path until the return on investment, government funding gives a lots of money to universities and to basic research. And if you have entrepreneurs that have the knowledge, and you have that they see a market opportunity, and if they have access to capital, to VCs or seed money or anything, and if they have a very important stuff, a mechanism that helps they transfer their technology and their knowledge from the university into the market, which are the technology transfer offices, they can start, for instance, a startup company, a biotech company or anything, that will focus on their internal R&D, but also providing services, because they have a technology platform. And usually, if this happens quite a lot, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 startup companies. And where are they usually located? In technology parks and business incubators, where they help to mature the business. They know the technology, but they also know that only technology is not important, that the management side is extremely important, the business side is extremely important. So these technology parks and clusters usually give infrastructure, management, and networking. And you have also the rest of the capital community giving the seed money, VC, angel investors, and other government funds as SBIR. And you have industry as investor, but you has also industry as a technical partner. And you provide these products, services, and tools to the market, which the market goes back and demand for more innovation and compensates the investors given the return on investment. So, I mean, and all of that, I put in green, but I mean, all of that in a very good and clear and transparent regulatory system that goes all along the way. Well, what do we have in Brazil? We have government funding that goes to university and university centers, but there are ups and lows. It's not steady. And I mean, there's a lot of money coming to university, but it's not steady. We have entrepreneurs and that see a market opportunity, but do we have access to capital? I don't think enough to create lots of startups. And do we have something that's very important, I think, since we work with radical innovations, and in Brazil we rely a lot on universities. There are no culture of tech transfer from university, at least in our area, in the biotech, in the biopharmaceutical area, to companies. So actually, he might create a biotech startup, whatever, but it starts with lots of holes in it. Do we create a lot? No, maybe 1 or 2. I can count on fingers of my hand how many companies we actually have been progressing into their R&D activities in Brazil. Do we have a technology park? No, we don't have. So, I mean, we don't provide infrastructure, neither management and neither networking. One of the things that strikes me is for the last 4 years, I've been going to the Biotechnology Industry Organization event that usually happens in the US. And everybody, when they see a Brazilian, oh, very nice, there's a Brazilian here. Where's the Brazilian booth? And we say, oh, we don't have a booth. And well, but Chile has, Argentina has, Colombia, Venezuela. You don't have a booth. Yes, we don't have a booth neither for ethanol. For the past 4 years, Brazil hasn't had a presence in bio, which is the major technology and business conference in the world for this area. And do we have seed, angel, VCs, and government funding for startup companies? We don't have. We don't have neither industry as a technical partner. So they don't add the expertise to this business as they would need. But we have industry as an investor. Because since 1996, Brazilian companies, they know if they don't invest in innovation, they will be left aside. They cannot compete in commodities for generics, for instance, and they need desperately for innovations. So what kind of stuff do we take to market? Very little, usually incremental innovation, some products, and the market usually don't demand back innovations to these actors and doesn't compensate the investor properly. And the worst of all, which is gray and it's not green, very bad regulatory, non-transparent, as Ricardo Mendes put earlier, very difficult regulatory system, which makes everything quite difficult for us. So, is there demand for R&D in Brazil? Well, not in the scale that would make businesses for the service sector feasible in the country. This is, we like as COINFAR, as the acronym for the industrial policy called PITC. We have a very bad taste for acronyms. And we created this other one called GFENAC, which is a group of companies that's supposed to mimic the American pharma, the Brazilian companies that do R&D. And we made a small survey asking them, okay, how many projects or intention of projects, studies that you are analyzing, do you have in each phase, incremental or radical innovation? And we asked about 12 companies. 7 of them responded to the survey only. And you see here how many companies per phase, and I put here preclinical studies that allow phase 1, the whole preclinical package, which takes usually 2 years with carcinogenic studies and so forth. Clinical phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, this is just more or less an average cost that they were expecting to spend in these projects. And you see that a lot of them have very nice intentions. I don't think they can afford all of these projects here, but they have very nice intentions. So, I mean, but is this enter to allow a value chain, a technology value chain to be created in Brazil? I don't think so. So, I mean, any entrepreneur that would like to enter the country, to make investments into the service sector, would have to look at the country as a platform to export these services abroad, because the demand is going to China and India, and the companies there cannot take care of all of this demand. But the thing, as I said earlier, it's cyclical. In a few years, it might drop a little, but it might pick up again later on. But it's cyclical, so this makes a difference. Well, and here's where I bring the criticisms. And I try to link. I'm not a policy. I don't study policy too much, but I participate a lot in industry meetings with government and academia, and this is pretty much our sense of things. I mean, I think some academic institution or researchers or scholars, even the Wilson Center, could try to put some data out of this on this stuff here. But I try just to outline what are the policy initiative, the desired impact of the initiative, the perceived outcome that we took from these meetings, and the persisting problems. And I will start with the IP law established in 1996, which I think was pretty much a WTO pressure that the country didn't look much to what kind of impact it would have on the industry. As, for instance, India and China, I think India at least hold to enter the WTO until 2005. And the outcome is that I think because of the wrong policy during the import substitution years, because there were no incentives for innovation, the national sector was just not ready. And it had to run to become ready fast. But the persisting problems still, and I would like to keep praising here to the ENPI, the Brazilian PTO. They are doing a terrific job in trying to reduce the backlog and many other problems. And most of the stuff that happened in Brazil because of IP, it's not their fault. It's the guys in the Brasilia, the capital, it's their fault. For instance, a lot of problems with biotechnology patenting. I mean, so for instance, a company like COINFAR, we realized that we were to follow the Brazilian IP law to patent our stuff, which is biotechnology related and natural product related, we wouldn't get the patents granted in the US or Europe. So we are patenting abroad. And Brazil is not part of our strategy anymore. Well, the ENPA backlog, which is not their fault. But I mean, they just create so much more problems that it started creating a conflict between the Brazilian FDA, which is called Anvisa, and the ENPA. Means that before granting a patent for drugs, it has to consult the sanitary authority, Anvisa. Another thing, okay, we work with genetic resources of the Brazilian biodiversity. Before granting a patent to genetic resources, they have to consult the Genetic Resources Committee in Brazil, which is extremely bureaucratic and it's impossible. And And enforcement, I still think, and this is not only our view, it's the view of our partners, companies around the world, that enforcement is still a very big issue, Brazilian courts and everything. Second thing, the generics law in 1999. I mean, nice idea. The design path was drug price reductions, increasing competition, and everything. Part of the impact, the desired impact we had as an outcome, it increased actually the competition, but the value chain was not ready. So you have seen a very big increase in imports, and that's why I think pharmaceuticals included in the new industrial policy in 1994, because it was, I think, one of the worst trade balances in the Brazilian international trade. Not only because they wanted innovation, because I think they didn't understand too much about the Brazilian, how it's the biopharmaceutical innovation done, but they want to reduce the amount of goods imported to the country. And what happened? There is companies that produce APIs, pharmacochemicals and everything, they are stopped existing in Brazil. So we are importing everything from China and India. We just do the final formulation in the country. But it also created a good externality. Some companies are cash rich now. Companies that got lots of resources from generics, they are now moving into more innovative areas. So this is important because it created the capital that we need for innovation. But still, I mean, you put a generics law, but you don't have analytical labs to show bioequivalence and bioavailability. Not enough that we need. I mean, it created so much bureaucracy that still have a big problem in the sanitary agents. Well, imports from India and China, and I mean, I can assure you, regulations more stringent to Brazilian pharmaceutical companies than to Chinese and Indian companies. So this becomes our work very difficult. The impact on the API sector and incentives for innovation. Generic has got to come with incentives for innovation. Well, I'll try to move a little bit faster here, but the industrial policy, this bad acronym CALPITSI, as Mendes showed earlier, it wants to modernize the industry, reduce impact on trade balance, and get tech advancements, but it's a big disappointment. For our sector, and we were put as a priority sector, and for R&D specifically, it might have had help in different areas, but for R&D, no help at all. Very little. A lot of discourse, a lot of talk, but very little actions. And I think it's because there is a lack of understanding of the market and R&D dynamics. People don't understand what the kind of value chain involved. And of course, I mean, one thing is to have the strategy, but if the operational actions do not follow the strategy, it's very difficult to make things work. BNDES Profarma, which is the Brazilian National Development Bank, they created a program called Profarma, but I put it here all other financing mechanisms. And it basically has the design part to have the local production, to increase innovation, and to have consolidation in the market, to see some mergers and acquisitions. Well, some type of modernization, it actually is happening, but I mean, it's still very little time. I think the program started in 2005, so I mean, it's very little time to assess that. Very modest consolidation. I think companies will die instead of being bought by other companies, but and very modest innovation too. And one of the things that's interesting here, if I didn't mention very clear earlier, but there are no contract research organizations or contract manufacturing organizations in Brazil. So the service sector in Brazil for R&D is very badly served. I mean, I'm basically here not just to attend this conference, but to visit and qualify suppliers in Brazil, in the US, because we have to hire the stuff abroad. And for instance, these financing mechanisms, they don't allow you to hire services abroad. You can buy products, goods, and everything, but usually they want some kind of level of nationalization of these products, but you cannot buy services abroad. So if I'm doing R&D and I need a tox study in rats or in primates or anything, I cannot use this money to finance my studies abroad.
William, can you?
Yes. I'll be a little bit, I talk a little bit about the innovation law, and I'll just stop here on the lot of the good. I mean, it's lei do bem in Portuguese, but a lot of the good, I would translate as lot of the good intentions. I mean, lots of good intentions and supposed to decrease bureaucracy and stimulate private R&D, reduce tax burden. But it actually is less bureaucratic, but needs more time to be assessed. But the problem is, again, I cannot use any of these tax benefits to hire services abroad. And if I cannot hire R&D services in Brazil, how am I supposed to develop these products? So it's quite difficult. I mean, none of these initiatives, and I would have others to comment, have been helping us. Very few. And I'll just pass very quickly. There is other suggestions in terms of lack of policy initiatives. So, I mean, people talk about neglected disease. We need policy there. Technical regulation. There's no regulation for preclinical and clinical trials in Brazil. Tech parks. No tech parks, as I mentioned earlier. Offset mechanisms, something that's important to mention. Everybody talks about Embraer, but we have to remember that Embraer technology and many other initiatives of Embraer were extremely financed of offset mechanisms. So this is very different from if you compare to other sectors. I talk about VC community. We don't have a strong VC society. And operational infrastructure measures. Let me see. Conclusions. And I think that's what we made wrong when we started this back in 2003. We thought biopharmaceutical R&D was something national, and it's not. It's global. You cannot just look to our national resources to do that. And when you think about policy, you got to understand the dynamics of the sector. I make some suggestions here that we can talk later, but I think the biggest challenge is technology management for us. It's not money. It's management of what we have. So, thank you. That's it.
Flávio, please. How is IT doing? Is it a little bit more hopeful or about the same?
Good afternoon. Initially, I would like to thank Paulo and the Woodrow Wilson Center for the invitation. And being the last one, I've tried to keep it short. As everybody understands, I'm the only one that keeps us from lunch. And because of my age, I'm going to try to be more positive in my comments. I'm on this innovation since the 60s. Probably some of you were not born at that time. And so I experienced most of the issues that you're referring. At the same time, I spent lots of time in a global company. I learned a lot. I was the president of Motorola in Brazil. So I learned the other side of the fence. So I'm trying to use all of that and my experience to formulate a few issues, eventually some different issues that we've been talking here, that I think that affect directly the capability of innovation. And we've been talking about Brazil in general, when most of even the policies can be made by the government, but the actors behind the policies are global companies. It's not Brazil that decides. We mentioned about import substitution. The companies that most benefit from import substitution model were the global companies. IBM, the most beneficial company that used we had a time where Brazil prevented imports of IT products. IBM was behind that. IBM and Burroughs at that time, Unisys today. So, yes, it is the country that are involved in the policies, but behind that, you have companies that are fighting for their interests. So I'm going to give my presentation from the point of view of industry. How does industry looks into things? And I do believe that we make a major mistake. We think that innovation is a question of R&D at universities. Innovation is a question of number of PhDs at universities. It's not. Innovation is an industry issue. Innovation is a market issue. It's the reaction to demand of the market that generates demand for innovation. It's not in the U.S. Eventually, you have push from the R&D labs, universities, because you have a capital market that absorbs almost everything that you get to the market. Not in the other countries. In the countries, innovation is a result of market demand. So I'm going to give my presentation from that point of view. So what's in Brazil that supports innovation? And the mistake is to think that this generates innovation. It does not. It supports innovation. If there is no demand for innovation, all of this is just a waste of money. So, yes, Brazil, I'm talking about IT mainly. Yes, Brazil is looking at IT as one of their priorities. That means we have the benefit of the government if I want to discuss something with the government. Eventually I have some funds to access. But that doesn't generate innovation in IT. Legislation that exists, the most important legislation that we didn't touch here in Brazil for innovation is called the informatics law. The informatics law and the beneficiary of the informatics law are the global companies. My company, Motorola, is in Brazil, has 800 PhDs, 800 researchers doing research doing R&D in telecom. Nokia is there, Siemens is there. So all the big players are in Brazil because of the informatics law. And the informatics law induces the companies to invest in R&D. They get tax benefit to compete in the market, and as a consequence, they have to invest a percentage of their sales in R&D. The reason of the incentives, tax incentives that those companies receive, and we don't have Brazilian companies competing, big Brazilian companies competing in this market, are really the large global companies. And the tax incentives for those companies are to compete with some illegal imports. So the reason for them is to have cost price, reduce price to the end user to compete with illegal imports. And so those companies receive those tax incentives and invest in R&D. So this is the major policy that we have in Brazil, incentive to innovation, is the informatics law. The new law that was mentioned here, the innovation law, has some advantages for some companies and a disadvantage for the companies that cannot access. We're still too early to say, but as I mentioned, I don't believe the innovation law is going to be the one that drives innovation in Brazil. They can be receptive for the companies that want to do innovation. We have funding from BNDES. Funding means loans with reduced interest rate. And from FINEP. And FINEP has now something that's called subvention. They give money to small companies that cannot receive from the innovation law. They can tap the subvention process. And the government is giving like $150 million per year. They gave first time 2006, and they are promising to give every year $150 million for those small companies. We have some stimulus to venture capital, and Jorge Avila, where's Jorge? Jorge Avila was a director of FINEP that stimulates this program. It's a stimulus to new venture capital funds. But the problem of inexistence of venture capital in Brazil is not because of government. It's because we don't have a capital market that absorbs the companies that are being invested in by the venture capital companies. So it's not a question of governmental regulation. It's a question of market. Some new programs are going on. I'm involved in the first one, attraction of R&D centers from multinational companies to Brazil. It's a joint project between the organization I'm a director, AMPEI, and the Agência Brasileira de Desenvolvimento da Inovação. We are looking to the factors that affect and to get action behind that. Second is the whole idea of promotion of software, software and services, and there's a new law that just came out, 2 weeks ago, to incentives on 2 priorities of the PTC, digital TV manufacturing and design of semiconductors. That's a new law. If anyone wants to know about it, I can explain later. Okay. We've been exposed to the Glauco Arbig's article, and this comes from his people that work with him at IPEA. It's a presentation that they did at the National Conference of Science and Technology. And the idea is to analyze the relationship between innovation and exports. I am a promoter of exports as a way to stimulate innovation. And what's behind that is those 2 sentences came out from this article from the IPEA guys. Export induce the company to compete in a more demanding market, and the incentive to export creates an incentive to innovate. So the question to innovate is the need to innovate. If you don't have a need to innovate, you can offer me PhDs, money. If I don't have a need to innovate, I don't innovate. Innovation is a demand to, if I need to innovate to compete, or if I need to innovate to satisfy my customer. If not, I don't innovate. My interpretation of this nice book, Friedman's book, The World is Flat, the concept of the vanilla ice cream. What's a vanilla ice cream? It's everything that our competitors can do as well as we do. If they cannot do now, they can easily learn. Number 2, if you are doing vanilla ice cream, if you're manufacturing vanilla ice cream, you are going to compete for pricing. If it's a question of mercantilism or not, today we are competing with the Eastern Asian countries for the lowest price, and we lose. So, rule number 1, there will be always one competitor that is going to offer vanilla ice cream lower than you. So you're out. I'm just mentioning that because that is a basic rule. It's not a question of internal market, because it's a global economy, you're going to be competing with those guys any place. It's a question that if you are doing vanilla ice cream, you are out of the market. You're always going to get either China or Vietnam or Thailand or any country that is going to offer vanilla ice cream lower than you. And so you are not... you can fight a WTO, eventually prevent a plant from moving. Brazilian companies are trying to fight China in WTO to prevent dumping of some products in Brazil. But that's a short-lived strategy. What my proposal is to Brazil to compete in a demanding market, not only to look to the use of technology internally. For example, IT. We have been using IT quite often. We have some examples of IT sectors, users of IT sectors very demanding, like banks in Brazil. Brazil is known as a banking system, demands IT. You have a very nice banking system with a clearance of checks, probably the best that exists. So we have good examples of usage of IT. We have a $16 billion market, IT market in Brazil. Larger than pharmaceutical, larger than Embraer. It's a very large market. So, but the issue now is how to compete with the big players. We're going to be competing in the international arena. In the past, we had this history of how a peripheral country is going to compete with a central country. That's gone. The market is leveled. We're competing against everyone. What's our problem in the international market? We are latecomer. We had such a huge internal market that we've been looking only internally. We never we never need to export. So most of the companies have been doing their homework internally. So we are latecomer. Second, we don't know how to deal with the internal market. We don't have customers. We don't have channels. And we have very little international reputation, especially in IT. So people know about what Israel does. We know about what Ireland does. We know about what China does, what India does. We know little about what Brazil does. We are improving. However, the speed of the improvement today of Brazil is lower than our competitors. That means China is moving much faster. We had a study, MIT did a study a few years ago, Brazil, China, and India. We are the same level in 2001, 2002. China has been improving much faster. India has exploded. And even though we are moving ahead, we are lagging behind. China and India are the key competitors. China in hardware, most of the hardware plants are being attracted to China. So when I talk about Motorola in Brazil, we have a plant in Brazil. Motorola has 4 mega plants worldwide. One is in Brazil. So we kept the one that my time was still there. We compete with the Chinese, so we can benchmark China. So it's hard to compete with China. But even though up to now, Motorola has been, it's the only plant south of the equator Motorola has in Brazil. So we're still keeping good competition with China. But most of the other companies are moving to China, hardware, and to India, their software. And if we are going to compete with low-cost products, we are going to have always someone doing vanilla ice cream better than we do. So, then what? Suggestion, three areas that eventually we should be focusing in the short term, at least, as a strategy. One is to get to niche markets. Areas that we can enhance some quality that or attack some area. I'm not sure if we're going to be moving. We have a Western kind of activity, so eventually we are better in some areas like banking. But we can even talk about Brazilian companies anymore because the Indians are in Brazil. TCS is in Brazil, Wipro is in Brazil, Infosys is in Brazil, Satya is in Brazil. So there is not a national concept anymore. Second thing is to enhance a quality that we have that the others cannot get. So near shore kind of thing. We are close to the US. Or, for example, I was mentioning some reason to innovate. We have a large diversity. We have Germans. So one of the good reasons to innovate, some of the companies have German origins. They brought the German entrepreneurship into Brazil. So they have German oriented companies doing significant research in Brazil. And this company is a world leader. So we have Germans, we have Japanese, we have Italians, we have Brazil is one of the characteristics is that this diversity is a positive thing in Brazil. And the third thing that's happening now with GE, with GM, with the other large companies, that everybody has been investing very much in India, and everybody's starting to be afraid. So the boards have already decided that you shouldn't keep all your eggs in the same basket. So, question, can Brazil tap into this opportunity? Can we compete for the excess that people are taking out of India? That's another thought. So, who is Brazil? Okay, so we're talking about Brazil. What's Brazil? One, when we think about Brazil, initially we think about the local, national companies. We've been promoting companies also from incubators, trying to imitate the garage concept. We forget that the garage concept is in the US. The garage concept is something that needs a capital market behind it. If not, the guys from the garage are going to die. Third are and that's I want to emphasize, the global companies in Brazil. So Brazil, Motorola is Brazil. Brazil is Motorola. Motorola is Brazil. Motorola is not a US company anymore. Motorola is a global company. And the subsidiary of Motorola in Brazil is a Brazilian company, as Brazilian as Embraer. So the question is, how can Brazil tap into Motorola's capability in their innovative system? That's something that I want to make a strong position, is that any country that wants to compete in innovation worldwide has to use their subsidiaries of the global companies. The subsidiaries of the companies, national companies of other countries, and their global companies. We have Embraer, Petrobras, WEG, Gerdau, and everyone has a story, and those are global companies, as global as any other company. But the subsidiaries of all the global players, the 470 multinationals, are as Brazilian as any other company. So how to use them into the Brazilian project? So I'm trying to next two slides to summarize what I think we should be looking positively to find access to stimulating innovation through the stimulation of access to a demanding market, that's the international arena. So my concept is, to stimulate innovation, you have to compete. In order to compete, those are the issues I think are important. One, to improve international image. We have to use not only governmental actions, but the Indians have been very successful in that. The Indians, the Russians, the Israelis, the Irish, they use their international communities spread all over to help the country to emphasize their image. So that's one issue, to improve international image. Second, Brazilian companies, IT companies, are very small. Our competitors are very large, because our competitors came from large groups. Tata is an automotive group. TCS is one piece of their business. Wipro is a agricultural group. So they are like 100,000 people company. We don't have large companies. So we have to start to increase the size of the companies through mergers, through corporate venture funds, and that's starting to go on in Brazil. We have two examples recently. And to bring large groups into IT. We have a Votorantim group, that's a large cement company, invests into IT. Don't focus on offering vanilla ice cream services. Use as much as possible the subsidiaries of the global companies into the Brazilian project. That means, how can EDS of Brazil, you mentioned EDS, how EDS is a customer of mine, how EDS of Brazil, IBM of Brazil can help Brazil in Brazilian project? How can they help Brazil to innovate? How Motorola of Brazil, how Siemens of Brazil, how those companies can help Brazil? And the non-IT companies, because most of the trades today, 50% of the trade is intra-company. Motorola doesn't export to a customer. Motorola exports to Motorola. So most of the issues are intra-company. Philips and Rodia and BASF, so all those companies are non-IT companies doing IT in Brazil. There's a pressure to get better results, to still have costs that are not competitive with China and in India in some areas, and eventually the industry is pressing the government to decrease the end cost. And we have a goal, and the goal is to Brazil to move to export like $5 billion by 2010. This, as a consequence, we need 100,000 new people by 2010. 100,000. So there's a major goal is how to train 100,000 new people for the Brazilian IT systems to reach this 2010 goal. Challenges: to get niche markets where we are effectively competitor eventually to leverage with our exit in aeronautics, to emphasize our exit ethanol. We could create a Brazilian company that specializes in ethanol, using ethanol as a base. And, we have to get this project on the attraction of R&D centers to Brazil. We have, China has been very successful in that. They have probably now 500 R&D centers in China. And because the R&D centers in China are related to manufacturing they are doing in China. So we need to get Brazil more active in this area. And if we do nothing, those R&D centers are only going to be working on the global projects of the company. For example, the Motorola R&D guys, they work on the global projects Motorola has. That's normal. We don't have a connection between the R&D center of Motorola and the Brazilian innovation effort. So because it's our fault, it's Brazilian fault. Motorola is perfect. Most of the large companies, they are tapping talent. That's their new policy. It's not a question of cost anymore. It's a question of talent. They want talent. We just completed a study. Duke and Booz Allen completed a study on the IT market, and most of the companies are tapping talents. Talent is the key priority. And but what each country has to do, like Israel does, is to create projects where the local R&D centers work with the large multinational centers in joint projects. To promote venture seed and capital is the only way is to get a strong stock market. And it's the absence of the stock market that keeps the venture capital funds in Brazil limited. It's nothing else. It's not a question of government regulation. It's nothing with the government. I am not going to invest in a pharmaceutical company because I'm not going to do what I'm going to do with the money with my shares I invested in the company. If I cannot get an IPO after that, I'm going to sell to whom? There's no one to sell. I don't invest. And the last issue is to use the global companies that have subsidiaries globally as a channel of insertion. That means the small companies on the incubators can partner with the global companies and access the market through those companies. And some of the companies are doing that. Telefonica is one that's doing that in Brazil, and Motorola is also trying to do it. So my issue is, one, innovation is a demand-driven, market-driven issue. Is not a governmental push or university push or R&D push, or it's a demand. And second, the Brazilian project have to use all the Brazilian players, the large Brazilian multinationals. I think Paulo is going to be working in that issue in next future. The large non-national global companies, subsidiaries exist in Brazil, together with the Brazilian companies. I think that is the one that the challenge for us is to put all of those together and try to come out with initiatives. So I hope public policy goes in that direction to attract all those actors to work for Brazil. And there is I've been working with the IT for some time. And when I talk to the subsidiaries of the companies, I always raise an issue, is that I talk to the CIO in Brazil. I say, look, CIO of Philips, for example, look, tell me, how has been your budget? Budget decreasing yearly. How's the headcount? Almost zero. Why? Everything is going to India. Philips is investing in India. And that is going on in all of the other companies. So there is a feeling in those companies in Brazil that if nothing is going to be done by them, they're going to lose their jobs. It's a question of job losing. So the idea is to bring all of those subsidiaries in a joint project with Brazil. That's a common interest. It's not only a national interest, it's a common interest to have Brazil as one of the core center for development. So the movement is, the captives has been a very positive movement. I've been working with them for the last 2 or 3 years. They're always connected. And since we have like 470, 500 Fortune companies, this has been very positive. So I thank you. And now I'm not a barrier between you and lunch.
Well, we are going to have, let's applaud first. We are going to have some question, a period of briefly here for question and answer, so I would invite you to come back. Now, every time you talk about innovations has to be market driven. Every time I go to a Starbucks, I ask myself, why on earth this is not a Brazilian chain?
It's simple. It's only, we can buy Starbucks, becomes Brazilian.
Yes, because, no, but it's one question that it should be naturally a Brazilian, or someone in Brazil should have thought about it, right? That you sell coffee. But I would like to invite questions from the audience. Hugh.
Hugh Schwartz, University of the Republic in Uruguay. I've learned so much from these 3 presentations. I'm really tremendously appreciative of what's been said here. At the same time, I would like to raise a question. Perhaps it's most clearly indicated to the second paper. And that concerns the difficulties of bringing about innovation. An affirmation was made that if you reduce the incentives, there will of course be less innovation taking place. And yet that's not clear. First of all, it's not clear what the level of incentives has been and what the level of profitability have been in this case in some of the pharmaceutical industries. And without saying that, and without indicating how extraordinarily skewed income distribution is in Brazil towards those who are earning a lot, really there's a misrepresentation of the situation. It could well be that the level of profitability is so high and the level of income distribution is so great that you could very substantially reduce the incentives and yet get the same level or even a higher level of innovation in the industries. This is something, without indicating what these are, you can't really say. As for innovations taking place, and because of the lack of stock market and so on, I just want to refer very briefly to the fact that there is a company in middle-level biotechnology, animal vaccines in Uruguay, which, due to the difficulties in Brazil and Argentina and the difficulties of exporting to Brazil and Argentina, suddenly was forced to look to the world. And as a consequence of this, is one of the most rapidly growing middle-level companies in biotechnology. And as for getting funds, there is even a worse stock market situation than in Brazil. And because of the success of this company, people have come to know about it, and the company is flooded daily with requests to invest in stock in the company. So it has more than enough funds to innovate at this middle level. And I don't understand, in other words, I think that the level of difficulty in finding funding to innovate in Brazil has been exaggerated. And we're not helped by the lack of data on what the income levels are in this field.
Give us the name of the company, because we have to buy that one. Yeah. What's the name of that company that you mentioned?
This is it's an animal vaccine company. For the moment, the name of the company has slipped me, but I can give it to you afterwards.
Well, you guys, you'll know where to find it. So, please, if you want to, because that was a comment. Do you want to?
Yes. Well, I'll try to comment on that. I'd agree with you to a certain extent that funding is not the major bottleneck for innovation in Brazil. There is different sources for that, be it by governmental promotion agencies, be it from the companies themselves that are making good profits in some areas. What comes out as a major barrier for these whole innovation activities is the institutional framework in which these companies are located. I think William can talk more. He's used to do research activities in the United States from sub-hiring companies here, and also trying to do the same procedures in Brazil. I think he can tell the differences and how much more it costs to do that in Brazil, how much more difficult it is, how much longer it takes, and everything. I think this is the main point. Whenever we talk about innovation, about industrial policies, everyone agrees that Brazil is in the right way, all these policies are right, it comes as a good signal from government, all these funds that are being created are good, but they're not enough. There's much more institutional reforms that need to be done to promote that.
You're talking about business climate in general. This doesn't affect only innovation, it affects everything else.
Exactly, but innovation is particularly affected by some of the barriers that I commented earlier. So.
Short.
Yeah, I would go in the same line. I mean, I don't think it's a problem of funding when you look that there are resources available. I mean, I think there's two comments regarding the IPO market, the process of an exit strategy through an IPO. I mean, it's not the only strategy, and we have seen in the biopharmaceutical market that many companies we are going after acquisitions and mergers. So it's not IPO is not only the only process that we would need. So I mean, I don't think that for the case of Brazil that would be a big problem. It is a problem, yes, but it's not a big problem. And the second thing, as you mentioned, in terms of incentives of innovation, I think the biggest incentive that we need for Brazil is less bureaucracy. I mean, take out all the problems that we have in terms of the healthcare system, as you mentioned. I mean, the problem of the market, it's not well distributed. Very few people in Brazil actually paid for the drugs that we have. I mean, if there's other macroeconomic aspects involved in that, but I mean, take out just the bureaucracy to take, for instance, a lot of nice ideas that we have at the university and commercialize them to the private sector. If you take out that bureaucracy, that's a very good incentive to innovate. I don't think you need to create more funding issues and put in place tax exempts, tax credits for R&D, which they are in place, but for instance, they have to deduct from your revenues. A startup company doesn't have revenues. So I mean, when we talk about incentives to innovate, it's just take a little bit of bureaucracy and put the normal stuff in place. I don't see that we need to recreate a wheel here.
Yes. Questions? Jorge.
Comment, then a question, but it's going to be short. I'd like just to make some points. I don't want to be seen as the guy who advertises the Brazilian environment and in opposition to the guys who criticize the environment. But
we are open for both. So go ahead.
No, but I really don't want to. I agree with most of the criticism, but when we deal with the policy, of course, no environment is perfect. So there's things that need to be done, and what we have to criticize is the direction and maybe the velocity. And I think this is the basic point. And the second one is that we should take a little bit of care when we make comparisons, and particularly with China, because part of what William says that has to do with bureaucracy is a price we pay for democracy. And this is something that, so far as I can understand, may mean that in the long run, maybe we will be better. This means rules are much more complicated. It's much more complicated to make changes because we live under democracy. But what is done over a huge social consensus. It's more stable. It's something that is being produced under democratic means. And I think that we have achieved a level of productivity which is, we are discussing really how do we move from the top of what could be an underdeveloped situation to a developed institutional environment. And this is really complicated. This is I would say that the easy job we have done in the first Vargas dictatorship, in the precarious democracy between the second dictatorship, and in the second dictatorship. Now we have a much deep concern with institutional building under democracy, because there's no other solution. And if I was to take investment decisions, if I was in the private side of this situation, I would appreciate maybe a little bit more the general institutional environment and not only the punctual difficulties.
Okay.
Let me get the opportunity. I didn't want to comment before. I think Jorge is right. We have some issues like health. It's not an issue of industry only, it's an issue of society. So Anvisa is a complicated organization, yes, but because we have different forces acting over there discussing the issues. It's not a clear that innovation is above everything. It's have health problems, social problems. We are now facing the same issue with environment. We have the Minister of Environment blocking the development of energy projects in Brazil. And has been a discussion. But because it looks crazy, how can prevent future, preventing investment in energy? But she's worried about environmental impact. So the end result is, like what Jorge said, is going to be a consensus of society. And I think that's a learning process, and I don't think that's a bureaucratic issue. It's a way that different forces in society. For example, one of the major criticisms is against innovation law. The innovation law is as it is because we from industry propose to be that way. However, meaning what? To get tax incentives directly from income tax, from some tax. The government gives tax incentives from tax. If you don't pay tax, you don't get tax incentives. You can get other things like subvention. They have access to subvention, but they don't have tax incentives. So this innovation levy is tax incentive. Some companies are complaining now that they are afraid of using it. And I understand why they're afraid, because they don't know if the revenue service, in general revenue service, are going to accept that as a legitimate application. Okay, that's part of the game. We have to talk to revenue to understand how it's going to be. So we are always complaining about the situation as it is. But most of the time you have to realize it. We are the ones to blame, not the government.
Well, I would like to take this moment to bring this to a close. I think it's I thank you very much, Jorge, for having brought up that issue. It's something that I think that I personally and this institute, the Brazil Institute, and we at the Wilson Center are very partial about is democracy. This is, for us in Brazil, is non-negotiable. And I think that we are going to have to solve the issue, this question, in the environment that we created. We fought to create it. I think, for instance, the issue of patent protection for pharmaceuticals is such a complicated and sometimes emotional issue in Brazil because it is involved, mixed with public health. And we know how complicated and how emotional that gets. But I think it is the right setting. I thank you all very much, all the participants, for having brought the issues to the table, and we are going. This is, as I told in the beginning, this is the start of a conversation. We are going to send you or make it available a sort of a provisional kind of report of this conference. We later on hope to aggregate everything from one more or two more conferences, and that we hope to publish and to make available, because we want very much to be part of that discussion, and we want it to be part of, in the context of a hopefully a democratic society that we are building in Brazil. As I always, sometimes I give lectures around and I describe the political side of Brazil, and I always tell it's a mess, but we wouldn't exchange it for nothing in this world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mas acho que a gente concorda. Eu só quis, eu acho que
Oh,
tudo isso que foi feito.
the
não vai
Arbix,
fazer nada.
Glaucus Arbix paper, the mysterious paper has materialized. It's outside.
Imposto de renda. Eu não tenho um caminho. Agora tem que começar a praticar. Paulo, um abraço.
Muito obrigado.
Paulo, obrigado.
Vamos ter uma comidinha agora para nós, tá? Aqui na sala.
Eu tenho uma proposta para você. Eu vou arrumar uma incubadora, vou incubar uma ou duas ou três empresas que você acha que falta na tua cadeia. Tá? A incubação, se você achar que tem que ser... Eu falei com o cara da Merck, ele acha que tem que ter uma empresa para teste pré-clínico. O Brasil divide serviço. Então, se vocês quiserem se envolver nisso de geração de empresas, maneira de exportação de serviços. Agora o que falta não é